What an amazing conference. I mean, really, I've been at Appian conferences now for the past 4 years. I know there were a couple before I came. I've had every single one of these become better and better. The one this week has been even better than the ones before. And not only that, but we go to a lot of conferences and a lot of events, and this is so far running smooth and really nice with a lot of good content and a lot of good interactions, better than I've seen with many other conferences, DIA or any one of the other ones that we go to. The other thing I wanted to mention also, it wouldn't be this conference without you, right? So you in the room, the folks that are working with us every day, the folks that are leveraging the Appian platform, the capabilities. We had about 140 people for dinner on Monday night. The space is growing, but it's really about the interactions between individuals. And I think that a lot of people had the opportunity to actually talk to each other. And stories we heard, for example, with Keith Koharski yesterday from Celgene, and some other stories I'm going to, FDA, others, every one of those have been honest. They're not selling Appian, they're talking about Appian. And I think that's what's also changed. The ability to actually no longer have the question of what is Appian, but what can I do with Appian is now becoming much, much more prevalent at conversations and things, and any interactions that I'm having. I would like, with that, very quickly to introduce a couple of folks that are extremely supportive and extremely helpful in interacting with you guys as we go. I am Evie Cohen, the VP of Life Science and Healthcare. I come from life sciences, but I also have with me on my team a couple of individuals that actually work in the payers and provider space. So let's go ahead. Fritz, please, come on up real quick, and we'll give you a mic real quick so you can introduce yourself to the team.
Does the redneck really need a mic?
I think it's only for the recording purposes, right?
Recording purposes. Can you hear me?
Let me turn it on. It is on.
Check, check. Yes, no? A little bit. Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name's Fritz Heimberger, as Evie said. Nashville, Tennessee is home for me, and I run our global provider division here at Appian, along with Kate on the payer side and Evie on the life sciences, pharma, biotech, med device side of the house. Been in the provider world in a clinical capacity for about 20 years now. I also have a bit of a background in healthcare finance, as well as a biomedical engineering background as well. So look forward to working with those of you in the provider space over the coming years.
Good. Thank you. And now you have a name and a face.
That's right.
Kate? Come on up, please. And be careful with the steps.
I would say the tall girl doesn't need steps. But
Good.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kate McConnell, and I'm Fritz's counterpart on healthcare payer here at Appian, the global industry leader. So we're servicing health insurers around the globe. And I've been with Appian about 2 years now. I'm a true believer in the power of the platform to address a lot of the problems we have in healthcare and life sciences with our siloed systems, and to deal with the new customer demands that are rising in the age of patient-directed care. So I joined Appian from Mcconne Health Solutions, which is now Change Healthcare. Some of you may have heard of it. We were the software arm of Mcconne Corporation, and I ran a line of software products for payers for almost 9 years. And before that, I spent almost a decade in consulting at Deloitte Consulting in the life sciences and healthcare practice. I worked a lot on claim systems, which I can tell you is an exercise in futility and frustration. So again, have been in software for 2 decades in healthcare, and I'm so thrilled to see this room filled with people who are as passionate about changing the future of healthcare as we are. So we have a terrific team, and I think we have a terrific presentation today.
Excellent.
Thanks, Evie.
Thank you very much. So with that, let me see if the technology works. Excellent. So another person that I wanted to introduce, and she must have been, oh, you're here. There you go. I was looking for you. Good. So I want to introduce also Terry Robertson. Please come on up real quick. And Terry leads all of our sales organization across life science and healthcare. Please.
So thanks, Evie. It's been a lot of fun witnessing the growth of life sciences and healthcare here at Appian. I always say I was born and raised healthcare. I've worked for Eli Lilly and Amgen and Catalent Pharma Solutions, and it's been really great to be a part of this organization for the last 4 years. And then to witness in the last 4 years a lot of the transformation. I see some partners in the room, and a lot of customers, and it's really nice to see how you guys, whether it's, regulatory operations, whether it's pharmacovigilance, clinical operations, even on the finance side, revenue recognition. There's a lot of different ways to apply Appian and digital transformation and drive new efficiencies into your business. So again, we're really grateful you're here at Appian World and look forward to helping to drive continued digital transformation. So
Thank you very much, Terry. So the way this is going to work, we're going to actually have a nice presentation from Jason Moyer, who I'm going to ask to come up in a minute, discussing some of the implementation and digital transformation that has gone at Merck for the past while. It is a nice use case in the labeling space, but Jason will talk even, also beyond just labeling, some of the transformation that, we can leverage with the Appian platform. We will then, after Jason's talk, ask for a set of panelists to actually come up here, several folks that I introduce as we go next. I will let you know that I took the prerogative on myself because we're moving from here to lunch afterwards, and lunch is going to be a networking lunch for all of us. So we're already in the room. We don't need to go to lunch. But I'm going to take about 15 minutes from lunch to actually extend the session a little bit. This is by design. This is not going to be by error, so that when lunch is long enough. But if you do have to leave because you have an appointment or something like that, please feel free, quietly to leave. But we're going to extend the session itself to about 55 minutes from the start we originally a minute ago. So with that, Jason, please come on up. We've worked with Merck for a good number of years already. I mean, it actually predates my time at Appian, and having the interactions with each one of the individuals on a personal basis, if it's Chris Lee, if it's Rob, if Rob Dahan, if it's Doug, if it's yourself, I can go on and on. This is really what makes the interactions very nice because it's part of a family. And as I mentioned earlier, what we hear here are honest stories. It's not just about the nice salesy thing. It's, okay, what do I do? Where can I fail? Where did I fail? Where can I succeed? Where can I turn it into a success? So with that, Jason, thank you so much. If you need me to do anything else, let me know, but go ahead.
No, I'm fine. This is on, right? So first off, I want to say thank you, Evie, for having me today at Appian World and for here all week. And I think I saw you come parachuting last night on the Titanic. Was that you? No, were you Tom Cruise? Somewhere Europe there, I saw you. So
it wasn't me. No.
It wasn't you, sure? Okay, good. So I'm here today to share kind of what's happening in Merck and part of our digital transformation. So I lead up a team around information management that sits in regulatory affairs and clinical safety. So one of the more conservative areas of the company. So we're trying to drive some of this change for our organization. So I'm going to share today what's happening a bit in that space, especially around labeling, what we've done so far. So I think this is probably Evie's slide here. So we'll just jump forward. So I'll jump right in because I know you guys have lunch next. I don't want to be too long here. We have a nice panelist here waiting for me as well. So the case for change for us. So in the labeling area for us, we've had a lot of different leaders in the area over the years. And I think a lot of the challenges have been around this visibility and transparency of label changes. So folks in life sciences, the label is a very important piece of our information, right? The asset we have that gets put in the patient's hands of our products and also used for promotional materials. All those kind of things are very important for a company like Merck. So for us, we have a lot of products. We operate in a lot of global environments. So for us to have that lack of visibility and transparency is a big compliance concern for us. Our regulatory tools we've had in the past have been very homegrown, very small in scale, not really ready for this kind of enterprise need, and they're complicated to use. We also have tools that don't really enforce the business rules, right, at all. So we have tools that are very easy to not comply, right? So we have compliance councils that follow our labeling processes, and weren't not compliant we wanted to be in terms of our posture for compliance. So it's really important, and we had a lot of drivers from a very senior leadership level in our organization to say, let's go after this and use Appian as a case study for us and use this tool to help us in this case. So I talk about labeling a little bit here and end-to-end labeling. End-to-end, everyone has their own definition of where that starts and finishes, right? So for us, end-to-end, you see along the top here some of the major milestones. Hopefully these are very familiar with folks in the room. There's around the activities that happen from as early as a safety signal. So if you think about a life cycle of a product, when you have a product in the market and you have a safety signal, you're going to have a change that product. Say there's reports around nausea or headache, whatever it may be. You're going to have to change that particular label. You're going to have the committee decide on that. You're going to have some outcomes of that decision. You're going to have a labeling committee that approves that new label, then distributes to all your markets throughout the world, then has to be concerned about how those local authorities feel about that label change or not. Do they want to modify, change, and then distribute back to the US again for a final approval and then out to the market for kind of final disposition. And our area owns a lot of that activity within our organization. So that's kind of when you see this kind of box on the right where now it moves into that artwork implementation and things that are more in manufacturing, supply chain, and ultimately promotional materials, pull through into direct-to-consumer advertising or things that go in the healthcare professionals' hands, things that are pamphlets, et cetera. That's where we're going to venture next. But you see the left side of this diagram is really where we used Appian to really drive a change in the space we control. And we think that we have done a really good job of really providing now that traceability and visibility and transparency in this process. And we removed a lot of what was a very manual email process, things, phone calls, very archaic in terms of technologies, and really transformed us now to give us that robust technology and workflow. And we can actually now have the opportunity to automate some pieces as well along the way, which is one of our next adventures. So this really gives a good picture of where we are in our journey. And as I mentioned, that right side I'll talk to later on, but that's really where the opportunities still lie for us as an enterprise, right? Beyond just regulatory affairs and clinical safety, how does the enterprise use things like Appian to help drive a true end-to-end process, right? That's where we're lining up here in terms of how we're looking at this. So how do we get there? So first, BPM a few years back, and I've been in this role now for about 5 years leading this group. BPM to Merck was relatively new in our space, right? No one knew what it was. We're just trying to get some of that groundswell about how do these kind of tools differ from what you may have seen before. And we use some very simple use cases, right? Trying to use Appian, for example, to expose even registration information, right? How do I get on my phone quickly and see what's registered where around the world? Things like that. But we really started to show is that you can have very simplified user experiences than we have today. Be able to pull data out, give you that visibility and accountability in the folks who own these processes, and really the execution. How do you see where the bottlenecks are? If you're just blasting out emails and everyone knows where the emails are, when the auditor comes and asks you where your label is in the process, you really can't answer very easily without calling every affiliate, calling every country, and asking them where it is in the process. We no longer have to do that anymore. We have it in a workflow. We have that captured. We don't have the ability to inform decisions before around the workload, right? We didn't know how many were out there. We didn't know where they were, as I mentioned. And then we really, through the approach up front, is that saying, let's look at this not as transforming the entire labeling process, but really just how we fundamentally do the process is the same, but how we enable it is what we're trying to improve. We thought the process was pretty good. We just didn't have the right tech around it to help satisfy it. So that's kind of how we started to get there in terms of that groundswell and give the momentum for our leadership. When I think about business enablement and how we look at this, so we took the approach of saying we're going to try and Appianize, the term I always use, kind of Appianize the process. We were looking at really 80% as the target, right? So we have a global audience. We have affiliates throughout the world that are using these tools, and they're always going to have uniqueness in their local market for certain regulatory needs, right? So we weren't trying to tackle every single one of those needs in the first process. What we're trying to here is give that global exposure, so we didn't really have that kind of 80-20 rule where 20% will come and get you later in those regulatory environments. But for now, let's just focus on what is the core global process. We also thought about how we already have a lot of other tools around regulatory planning, safety, other things we're not going to touch. We're going to really leverage those in the process, and what we did was use some of our registration information we already have to kind of leverage it to kick off our labeling process. So we already know what countries have what labels in them. We already know where they are. So let's leverage that information rather than recreating an Appian, for example. It kind of kicks off the workflow in essence from our other tools. And the idea here is also improve the process in terms of you don't want a whole lot of handoffs. If you think about technology, as you get better at that, there's less handoffs. It just kind of shows up in your inbox and your task list, whatever, what you have to go do next. You don't have to worry about the handoffs as much as you get more enabled in that sense. We also have opportunities to simplify the business process throughout, and then we actually did some pieces around maintaining a familiar experience. We kept some pieces as they were. There was a form that every affiliate in every market would fill out and send back to headquarters for labeling changes. We kept that in place. We put it in Appian instead. So rather than emailing a Word document back and forth with rich text and highlight and all these different changes, we put it in Appian and said track all that visibility and all the steps in that approval process in Appian. So when the auditor comes and asks us, we have the full history of what happened. We don't have to scramble for it in the process. So when I go through technology enablement, I think it's really important here to think about how Appian comes to the table with that kind of low-code design and approach. And this was really I've been at Merck about 20 years now in various roles throughout the organization. And some of those were spent in IT early in my career. And I come back to it now, think about how slow we were with the old waterfall approaches and how we did things. Appian really, really is the new way for us around agile and rapid development. We have sprints, we have scrum meetings, we have all those kind of good things happening at Merck now, which weren't around, at least in my area, in regulatory affairs years ago. And these are really showing promise for us. I think even having good partners that Appian has with Princeton Blue we have up here, and how we use some of their frameworks to kind of leverage that. So they have built some life sciences frameworks we're able to use and examples of for labeling or other life sciences examples that help kind of accelerate your knowledge, right? Get folks in the room kind of see this, understand it, and then digest it. Then you can build what you need to, but at least you have that kind of starting point to jump off from. And that was really important for us to get this thing moving. We also have the mobile first approach. I think, having to be able to leverage Appian to do mobile as a part of it is really important, but you also have to think about some limitations about that as well in your mindset, right? Because you're not going to have someone doing rich text formatting in their phone, right? They're not going to be having highlighting and all these things in your phone. You have to change your model and your process a bit around that. And it's important to do mobile, but at the same time, think about what limitations you may have in that process. So that was the first for us, because it is a really great thing that everything comes out mobile, but you got to just consider that in terms of how the users will experience that and the kind of trade-offs you have to make in that process. And the last bit is around leveraging integration. So part of our strategy around regulatory information management, safety management, call it what you want, all these pieces, we're not trying to use Appian to rip out all the core platforms we have for submission management, content management. We're really leveraging Appian to kind of layer on top and talk to those different tools and give the users the experience of simplification and be able to draw out the documents or draw out the data where they need to do their job. So that's what we're trying to do here with Appian. We're not trying to fundamentally replace those, but instead leverage the strong integrations that Appian provides us to do just that. Around adoption and change management, this is common, I think, in any project, but I think around Appian, for us, it was, again, that early on adoption, the strong management, sponsorship about how we're going to use BPM to change how we operate in kind of a digital way. So for us, getting that strong sponsorship from our SVP level and even EC level at this point in time, we have some folks that are now knowledgeable around BPM. It goes a long way, right? Talking about global processes, global cross-divisional activities. It's really important to have that. I think it's also around demystifying, working in email versus working in a task-oriented environment. I think it definitely is a little bit of a mind shift, but I think you get a lot more value thinking about how you manage your tasks of what you're being sort of asked to do in your process versus trying to find all those in emails amongst other emails. It could be things coming in, it could be just general communications or everything else. The tasks are there for you in the morning, they're there for you at night. You can look at them whenever you need to and see where things are in the process. It's really a quite efficient way to work. And I think it's important always, kind of what's in it for me or with them statement, right? So I think it's important for that discussion as well, but also what's in it for them in terms of your management. One thing we try to show up on is that we're looking at compliance as one of the drivers. So right now we're being viewed as not being very compliant. So think about what your management's seeing. Our process is not executing as intended. So let's think about what we're doing for us, but also what's happening for management, where our risk is for the company. So that was an important aspect as well. We also took a very thoughtful and measured approach in terms of rolling it out. It was important to have conference-room pilots and think about how we do that. So we had those early framework discussions using from Princeton Blue's frameworks and things to show some of those pilots what we could do. Then we had a full production pilot. Then we actually did a phased approach throughout the world. So that was how we kind of approached things in Merck, because we have such a large workforce globally. We're thinking about doing it in chunks. We do a couple of countries in Latin America, a couple in Asia Pacific, we do that kind of approach, then broaden it from there. So it's really, I think, a really successful way to do it in terms of if you have a global organization. It's a good way to do things in terms of the change. Around lessons learned, I think it's really important to think about how you look at the things you may have in workflows today you do yourself, right? So think about emails. You may have an out-of-office message you send to someone and say, hey, by the way, I'm out of the office for a week, so talk to so-and-so. That same methodology we had to bring into Appian for us, because we had a lot of folks globally that are a single point of failure for regulatory authorities, right? So if we're going to send a label out, there's a time clock that starts, right? If someone's out of the office, there better be someone else to pick it up in the process. So right away, we have the ability to kind of reallocate or reassign that work to someone else. These are important aspects that we had to build in that are common in email, but we have to think of that in workflow as well. Another one we did was really around center of excellence. So on my team, we had the opportunity to build out a few folks that really are understanding what we're doing across the Appian landscape for regulatory affairs and clinical safety. And this helps you, right? Standardizing as you have multiple tools, launching multiple tools, kind of that standardization of user experience. One of the things around simplifying it is to make sure that it's easy to use, right? So we're trying to make sure we have that component sharing, doing things similarly across the different tools in the same platform. Again, just helps to give that kind of the case of change and how we do it in a very thoughtful way. And I mentioned a bit about the aggregation layer and how we use that to really simplify the user experience. In the regulatory space, we have a lot of tools that are very complicated. So we're trying to get away from that and reuse this Appian platform as a kind of aggregation layer to help remove that complexity from folks and do their jobs more effectively. The last thing I think is really one that we didn't have in our thoughts right away, but actually came out as far as we got going about a year and a half ago into this process, was really that workforce demand management, right? Think about the manager of labeling. They can now see which label writers are involved in which label changes. The folks that manage the global regulatory affairs teams can now see which labels are pending approval, which ones are out there. You can do a lot of load balancing and workload balancing now with your teams as well as a result of this. So you know how many are out there, how many are pending, et cetera. Really almost a lesson learned for us. We should have thought about that more up front and had that as part of our plan of attack and a lot of that with them statement for some of the management, but really a nice add for us to learn along the way. So I'll just share a little looking ahead statements and see where we are going forward. So I think it's important now to kind of tackle for us that other 10 to 20% we kind of skipped with our initial rollout. And this gets down to more of that specific needs that countries may have. And things that are unique to the labeling process based upon the kind of labeling change is, if it's a CMC change or a country-initiated change, they all have different uniqueness to them in terms of regulatory activities. And now we have really the opportunity to look about RPA and how that machine learning and other things around OCR and things we can do differently in our process now that we have kind of Appian in place. You think about how we heard this week about kind of plugging in some of the RPA and how we manage that. These are important aspects for us, being able to take robots now and do parts of that, right, in the process. Think about even, as I mentioned earlier, around that move from regulatory affairs into our manufacturing division, how we take information that could be in the label and then transpose it into artwork that goes in the package of the product or the insert for the product. All those kind of things are today in our organization being manually keyed by someone in a regulatory affairs function into a manufacturing area, right? So they're very clear robotic opportunities for us. So those are the kind of things we're going to look at and try and tackle. And the last thing is really around that, continue to invest time in just making the interface as slick as possible. I think as digital is kind of one of my things is pushing on my team is that about digital, it's about simplification, right? We really want to make sure that's front and foremost. And our affiliates around the world, they use multiple tools, right? So anytime we can remove multiple tools and then give them one tool that does multiple things in essence, they're happy. So that's one of the big pushes for us. So that's kind of where we're looking ahead. And as I mentioned, that pull through to promotional materials and other things as well are areas we're going to invest more in and look at. And I think we're just kind of getting our feet wet there. And I'm looking forward to do more in that space. And I think I still have our opportunity to go forward with. So with that said, I think it's time to hand it over. Thank you.
So please sit down as well.
Yeah.
And with that, we're going to continue into our panel part. We're going to hear from several other life science companies. I'm going to ask Andy, please come up, Ingolf, as well as Darren. Darren is joining us from Syneos, Andy from Biogen, and Ingolf from PS Health, sorry. Anywhere is fine. Good. I guess I have a chair as well, so good. So we're going to start with Darren real quick. And Darren actually has a couple of slides that we're going to walk through. The other panelists, I'm going to actually ask more of a discussion. Each one kind of took the liberty of identifying how they want to tell the story themselves. So we're going to start with Darren right here. I'm going the wrong. Yeah, there we go. So are you mic'd on?
Mic is on now. There we go.
Wonderful.
Hi, everyone. I'm Darren Pullman. I lead enterprise architecture in our agile delivery group within Syneos Health. And I think to set the context, I need to tell the story about Syneos Health, and that's really what the next couple of slides share with you. Syneos Health was really born through a merger of equals 2 years ago. We had INC Research come together with Inventive Health, and we said, you know what, we can compete in this market very differently than anyone else that helps biopharma companies basically take their inventions, their molecules, their devices, and help get an FDA approval, help drive that clinical trial. The other piece of our business is a commercial business. So as you're executing that clinical trial, it's really about how do you name this new product in the market? How do you advertise for it? Maybe what's the right pricing for it? How do you get the return on investment? We also have groups that engage patients as well as healthcare providers. And so very diverse business model. And as a company comes together as one company, we feel that we can compete in this market. And if you go to the next slide, this is really where we're different than our top competitor. We look at every customer as unique, and they have their own preferences as far as the systems they use, the data that they leverage. And this is where it's really important for our future to achieve dynamic assembly. And so, we treat every customer based off of their uniqueness, and we're trying to drive the services that they need in order to be successful. And it's really about helping our clients, our customers, shorten the life, from their invention, their molecule, their device, and taking that from lab to life. And that's what we're all about. So if you go to the next slide, this is the next piece where I think Appian and intelligent automation technologies come into play. And it's really something that is unique to our company. We have something called a trusted process, and this is on our clinical side of our business. And it's really around when you put the faith in our company to help run your clinical trial. It's all about how do we have a repeatable process, still being unique for that customer, to identify sites for that clinical trial, to activate them quickly, to start identifying patients and enrolling those, and delivering successfully that clinical trial. Because that's what it's all about, is how do I get through that process? How do I help with that FDA approval? And how do I start getting a return on our investment? So if you go on to the next slide, this is where we looked at Appian as a tool that can help us with each of those strategies. And we wanted to tackle many of our gnarly internal processes first, to get our hands around it, to gain that experience, and to prove out that Appian can meet our needs. So we picked two gnarly type problems. One was a revenue recognition standard change that we faced a couple years ago. And the second one was around global data privacy, which many of you might be struggling with as well. And so we took Appian as a technology platform, and we started using Appian Professional Services to go after revenue recognition, as well as billing, and looking at how we're managing the finances. And so the application that was our first one was called RBB, and it was really around enabling our project managers to become more focused on delivering those studies. And it was really about enabling that collaboration with the finance group, whether it was to collect revenue or to do billing in a timely manner. Historically, they were calling each other up, they're sending emails, they're passing around spreadsheets. It was highly inefficient. So we wanted to free up the attention of that project manager so they can deliver results, not worry about what revenue are we taking, should we bill right now or not. And that's where it's been very successful. We use Appian Professional Services to help deliver that first application. It went live in 4 months, so pretty quick, at least quick for us. I would say that our company has historically done waterfall type projects. This is our first time doing Agile, so you get into a lot of changes with that. And Appian Professional Services, not only did they deliver in 4 months, but we also continue to use them even today. So it's been live for 2 years now, and we continue to evolve that platform. The second one is an application that we use for global data privacy, as well as security incident management. And Appian Professional Services actually surprised us. They pointed us to one of their partners. This is where Vuram came in, and we've been delighted working with them as well. And very quickly, we were able to deliver case management for data privacy requests. We did that in four months. And then several weeks later, we actually just launched the security incident management solution. So our approach has been go solve gnarly problems, deliver quality solutions, and then build upon that. And that's where we've had a lot of success. So thank you for this opportunity.
Wonderful, wonderful. So with that, we're going to turn to Andy real quick. So let's make sure the mic is on. Yep.
Guys can hear me? Okay.
So Andy will tell us a little bit of the story at Biogen, and there's been a nice transformation. And for us, I think one of the key elements is being able to actually work with a company like yourself, like many other folks here, but actually looking at the practicality in which Andy approaches things. And Andy has always been able to get me centered, get our professional services folks centered. He's kind of hugging everybody, in a loving way, but guiding us into where we need to go. So, please.
Wow, he's being really kind. Darn, I feel bad. So, Andy Hsu with Biogen. I've been with Biogen about 3 years now. I'm in a group which is called Technology, Analytics, and Data Insights, which covers safety and regulatory sciences. I do sit firmly in the business, but obviously with a technology bit of a focus. I could wax poetic about a lot of different things, background, intros, and all the other fun stuff, but I won't bore you with that. I've been thinking about what I would say, given the few minutes that I have, right, before we get into the panel discussion. When I look at the space, when you look at the conversation we've had today, or not today, the last couple of days. Low code is here. What does it mean? What does BPM mean? So on and so forth, right? You've heard the conversation. We have to understand our business problem, the what's in it for me, right? As Jason articulated, the gnarly problems. The other part is I also want to talk a little bit about contextualizing a bit of the problem statement as I walked in, and when I look at specifically within regulatory and safety, but I'll kind of go back to regulatory. I understand many of you are in life sciences, but for those who aren't, or those who aren't necessarily as familiar in the area, here's a couple of things I just kind of throw out to contextualize some of the problems. In regulatory, we talk about needing the information and having to call people. Why do we do that, right? We have regulatory information management systems. The reality is, for the most part, much of our data isn't really data, it's actually content and structured content. So those who have ever worked on assembling a dossier, right, and you have your ECTD standards and all those fun things, none of it is actually data. It tells you, here's a guidance. It's like a table of contents. Like I always look at it as kind of like a Dewey Decimal System, or you know, if you remember libraries when they existed, right? I do, anyways. But you bring it up, and you know, if you want to a specific data point, you actually can't pull it from your dossier because your dossier is a giant PDF. Now, can you apply different technologies to pull that together? Of course you can. You can also ask different people at point to point. Having said all of that, that's one of our fundamental challenges. So when we talk about being able to actually manage our information, it's the fact of the matter is we don't actually have the information in a digestible way, in a human readable, or not in a human readable way, human digestible way. Very human readable, because you talk to a country manager, they'll go to a dossier, and if you have a specific question, what's the shelf life? You might go to your label. You might go to your ECTD in a specific section to see what you asked for. You might you look at your approval letter to see what was finalized. But again, it's all contextually based, right? The other part is that the data that regulatory works on, the dossier that we assemble, if you actually think about it, you know, there'll be some regulatory folks who will probably disagree with me, but we don't own any of the data, right? We don't. I always equate it to being a curator in a museum, right? We don't own anything in that museum. But we're expected to know everything about everything in that museum and to manage it, right? That's actually, again, one of the fundamental challenges. So if you think about the context of our problem, right? We have a challenge where we have highly complex systems. And let's break that down. Why can't we make them simpler? Well, because the dossier, when you do the publishing, if you've ever had to run a publishing tool, it's not simple. I'm not going to ask Appian to break that either. You know, our regulators are demanding things in a format that's not data-centric, despite what they say and despite some of the things that are going. So if Hilmar's in the room, apologies. And Brad, who recently came over, I think you recognize that. We have a disconnect in terms of being able to look at it from a data-centric way. The other part is, it's interesting, within regulatory in particular, when you talk about things, they're not highly transactional-based systems, right? And the context of that, you know, you go to Amazon, you shop there every day, every week, whatever. You know, I get packages at my house pretty much every other day.
Hopefully stuff you order.
No, actually, not normally me. That's normally Robin, but different story altogether. But having said that, you're very, you know, if you're in something all the time, even if it's difficult, which is not in Amazon's case, but even if it's difficult, you don't necessarily complain about it because you're kind of forced into that situation. But if you're in regulatory, again, you're curators of information. How often do you actually need to go in to make changes? You're not in there every day. However, you need the information to make decisions. So if you need to actually understand, and we'll use different things, if you want to know a card catalog in Vivo, or if you're talking about, the insight event, reference event, so on and so forth, you need to know all the structures to find your information. You go into a navigation pane, you're going, I have no idea what any of this means because there's no business context for any of it. You're always going to be at that point of failure. So I kind of talk about a lot of this to contextualize the actual, not just the problem we're trying to solve, as in we want to be faster in assembling a dossier. We want the labeling, as Jason opened up with, everyone has a different definition of what end-to-end labeling is. That's fundamental to it because we don't own the entire process, we don't own the data, but we're expected to manage and curate all of it. So if you think about that, that's why I look at it from a, where does Appian come into play? Being an orchestrator and being a low-code approach orchestrator is exactly what is fit for purpose, right? In terms of being able to introduce that. How do you actually introduce automation, NLS, all the different things in order to extract information and content into data formats, so on and so forth? Again, you need that kind of orchestration layer. And hence why when I looked at it and looked at how we should approach it, Appian became a natural choice. Now, specifically within Biogen, one of our first use cases for us was actually wrangling around regulatory intelligence, and specifically soft intelligence, not the what is this exactly published, but our interpretation of that, and putting a workflow in place to manage that. So you can tell what I'm looking at doing there is actually building the seed for how we actually approach a data-centric record, shall we say,
Sharing
around
across our
intelligence.
whole organization as well, right? So, you know.
Yeah, and then tying it all together. So I think with him getting up, he's telling me I need to speed up. So with that, I'll actually stop here and actually pass over to Ingolf. But for me, it was more or less about the intro, but more about talking about the problems.
Excellent. Thank you. We're going to hold questions to the end. Quickly, Ingolf, one of the challenges for us, actually opportunities at the same time, we were at a couple of various different events recently, in the past recent, I guess, months, I for Pharma. And interestingly, a lot of pharma companies coming there, but the discussions and the use cases I ended up talking about were things we've done in the healthcare, things we've done, you know, with PS Health and with yourselves. So there's a lot of overlay and there's a lot of cohesion now going on between life science and healthcare. And I want you maybe to help us kind of tie that a little bit together from your perspective.
Well, can you hear me all right? Yeah.
Yep.
I was gonna tell you. You said it initially, being vulnerable and talk about what didn't work so well. So I thought I'd tell you just a little story. This doesn't really answer your question, but I think it's a fun little story about a big Appian bug that we'd built that resulted in some really interesting insights. Before I do that, I just want to check who in this room has read the book The Undoing Project. No? Okay, you got to go and read that book. Michael Lewis, and there's some great examples of the fallibility of man and making judgments. Up in Oregon, they had a whole bunch of x-rays, talked about diagnosing or the risk of stomach cancer. They built a little model, a little decision model, and then they handed out these x-rays to radiologists and asked them to rate them. And of course, the finding was, one, that the very simple model, 6-7 criteria, equally weighted, performed better than all the physicians. The second thing, which was much more shocking, was actually that the same physician, they didn't know they were being fed duplicate scans, had vastly different, or made vastly different decisions on the same scan. Okay, unbelievable. So our story is we were working with a group in Brighton in south of England, and they were running a so-called referral management center where, in essence, they're trying to determine the appropriateness of a referral from a family doctor back into secondary care. And the process looked like this. Imagine the call center with 25 people, 5-6 clinicians, and a bunch of administrators. Step one, log into the National Health Service website or referral management system, copy and paste every single document into your own little CRM system. This could take like 5 to 7 minutes. Then make a decision whether a clinician needs to review the referral, then turn around and basically manually enter into the same system or some other system, book the patient. Beautiful. We saw this and thought, I'm coming to the bug quite soon.
No problem.
We saw this as a beautiful way of applying Appian, right? So what do? We put RPA in on the front end. We put some fancy OCR. So this was sort of semi-structured data. Built quite a cool little rules engine, and then RPA on pushing this out. Fine-tuned the thing a bit and got some pretty spectacular results. So one day in a management meeting, my head of engineering comes running in, a guy called Rob, sort of a very geeky guy from Oxford, and he says, Ingolf, we've had a big bug. But he had such a funny smile on his face. And what had happened is we'd created about 200 duplicate referrals at the very front end of the process. These referrals, the duplicates, had gone through the system. We'd caught them at the back end before we made the booking, so that was fine. We just had one problem. When we were going to start to delete the duplicates, the clinicians had made different decisions on almost 30% of the referrals. and Rob, the fabulous man he is, he says, Ingolf, this is great. We have a perfect lab for randomized control trials, randomized trials. And I know I'm running out of time now, just wrapping up. So we said, this is so cool. Okay, so of course, we can now come to a customer and we can say, we'll feed in some duplicates and we can be testing your administrators and your clinicians and the decision-making quite quickly. And of course, if you now start thinking about this, now we're starting to talk about training clinicians. Okay, it's not going to be, what do we really have is a perfect laboratory for training an algorithm, right? And I feel this sort of little use case really shows the power of getting almost thinking about this as building a lab. It doesn't really matter whether you're in the labeling part, but thinking about how do you get first the process to run properly end to end. And the other thing is, how do you, I like you talking about sort of 80%, trying to get to 80% of the processes. We did something similar. We talked about something we referred to as automation success rate. So we tried to say, how many manual steps are there? And then obviously, how many of those could we automate? And then what we of course did then was we kept making fine-tuning and improving the back-end rules engine. So those were, so if I had a piece of recommendation, get the end-to-end process really, it doesn't have to be tight, but it can't be any rekeying. Define a metric for automation, and then start thinking about, the rules engine work will almost come out of itself. So I didn't answer your question at all, Abby.
But what a story. So
okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. So with that, we're going to open it up to some questions from the audience. Thank you.